Exactly. I managed to charge this thing for a cheap.
Counting on the 49% to last me.
Oh, yeah, that was fun to play with.
$80 a person.
As much as you between the three of us, it was fun. This is Murray's official. Here's your stuff.
They're not here. Okay, so.
Oh, yeah, we're going to go first.
It's going to be televised.
Oh, do you want that? Okay.
Didn't see the audio visual guy coming in.
Very sorry.
Hello, Kel.
Staff.
Televise these?
Yeah, they do.
Okay, they are televised.
Yep, so you can see me coming in late. You can switch them, or you could leave. I think it's kind of funny to leave them the other way, but.
Red light.
Well, we know it.
And then we can confuse you by saying, calling you Carol and you Steve.
I think that'd be true.
For the rest of the audience.
Usually he comes down.
I know.
I wish I could be far more helpful with that answer, but that's what I got.
Or is it that you're the pilot, isn't it?
I assume that's
Right.
what that means.
There we go. Starting late because staff was a little tardy tonight. This is the Monday, March 26 study session of the Littleton Planning Commission. Tonight's agenda, proposed updates to Littleton Sign Code, Title 4, Chapter 3 of the City Code. Switching it over from, let's see, where is it now? Building Code
Yes.
to the Zoning Code. Before we turn it over to staff, I just want to say, before we lose half our audience an hour from now, I want to thank Andrew for your service for 2 terms. And also Brian, who's not here, and Lynn Kruger, who resigned 2 or 3 months ago. Just again, thank you for your service. Littleton is a better place for your efforts, and we will miss you. Thank you.
Thank you. And you just said.
The poet laureate is now leaving the planning commission, so.
I'm not going far.
It's some of the best summations I've ever heard.
Well, I'm basically leaving this post to take on the chair of the South Metro Chamber of Commerce.
So,
I will be directly engaged. The City of Littleton is a member. Please engage. We'd love to have as much as you.
Fantastic in here.
I'm going to live here for at least 12 more years. Others in 2nd grade, right? I'm not going for better or worse.
That's wonderful. Well, congratulations on your new post.
Thank you.
But it's kind of a downwards appointment, right, from the Lofty Planning Commission?
Step down. It's not even a layout.
Well, as I said, City of Littleton is a member, and just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, Karina Elrod and I were in the White House talking about transportation projects and how we could get money for various things. We basically talked about Mineral Station without the detail of Mineral Station. And the advice we got from the White House was work with the Highway Commission. You're going to get the most money through the Highway Commission. if we go ahead and pursue this route. And to have that opportunity to be a representative, knowing what we know about, for 6 years or whatever this is worth, to offer that up and to hear that feedback was very valuable. So there is a direct relationship between the work we do in the chamber and the WIC group we've been doing here. So as I said, I'm not going far. I'm not done.
Okay, we expect you to have your 3 minutes piece every 2 weeks.
You'll have to hit the gavel.
Out of order.
You'll be yellow carded a lot, right?
That happened to me when I was a kid.
Another analogy from you.
Yeah, he'll come up with some.
Red card.
All right. Well, let's turn it over to staff for tonight's presentation.
Do you have a PowerPoint?
Is there a PowerPoint for this?
I don't know, I'm asking
I
you.
didn't know, I didn't prepare one.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, what we're here tonight is to talk about the sign code. And this is a bit unusual because traditionally you've never seen the sign code.
Right.
And the reason for that is the sign code in this city is in the building code. Now, I have to be honest, this is the only city I've ever been involved with a city zoning code that has a sign code in the building code. Sign codes traditionally are a zoning function, and they are handled by the zoning department, whatever that's called, and they are done as part of a zoning package. Now, if you were to read our current sign code, you would read that it requires both a sign permit and a building permit. I know of no other sign code in any of the 4 states I've practiced in to date that requires such a thing. So you may ask, well, why is that? Well, the sign code, much of it was written back in the 1970s and really has not been addressed since. So what led to this coming now to you is about 6 months ago, the council had a study session on the issue of portable signs in the downtown area. And as we began to look at the sign code, we began to realize that the sign code needed to address that, but it needed to address some other things as well. And the first basic one is, it needs to be where it should be, which is in the land use code, not in the building code. If you were to look at sign issues, they would go to the Building Board of Appeals. With all due respect to the Building Board of Appeals, its expertise is in building code items. Its expertise is not in land use. And so, working with the community development staff, we worked through the sign code to recodify it into Chapter 10, Chapter 17 of Title 10, which will place it in the zoning code. Now that will mean for the future, like any other part of the zoning code, changes to the sign code will formally come to you. So you may be wondering, well, why are we seeing this change? Well, because we thought it was important enough that you should have an opportunity to see what is being done, even though technically it's not within your jurisdiction, because it will become in your jurisdiction. And so that's the sort of underlying background for why we're here tonight. Now, in the draft that you have, this uses what we call standard legislative format, which is deletions are indicated by strikeout and additions are indicated by all caps. And that is just a standard process used in drafting legislation so that the policy-making body is able to easily determine what's an addition and what is a deletion. So, starting with the definitions, and I'm not going to go through I have some questions for one commissioner which I'll work through generally what is being done, and then I'm pleased to answer questions that the commission might have. We are adding some new definitions. One is a definition for mule. What we are getting on occasion is individuals who are really basically doing a sign, but doing it as a mule. And the difficulty with that is we certainly appreciate works of art, but a sign is a sign, and it creates sort of an odd situation if you can do a commercial sign and call it a mule, but you can do another commercial sign and you have to be permitted. So we address the issue of mules. We also addressed the issue, we did not have an off-premise definition in our code, so we added that. One of the issues that does come up is political signs. Political signs have been a problem ever since the Reed case was decided by the Supreme Court. Now, a variety of commentators, I think, read the Reed case far broader than it is. But one of the things it did say is that you cannot distinguish between political signs and other types of temporary signs. That you have to basically treat temporary signs the same. And so one of the things that we have addressed here is making sure our temporary sign code portion of the code includes political signs. And we've added a definition for portable sandwich board signs. And this was to reflect the direction of the City Council last year, that they would permit these signs on a limited basis. There would have to be a permit. They would be allowed in the downtown area only in front of a business and subject to the fact that all of the requirements for the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of accessibility be met. Because the public sidewalk is an Americans with Disabilities Act facility. So we can't have signs blocking the public sidewalk. In many cases, these signs will simply be up against a building because many of our sidewalks are only 5 feet wide. We have tree boxes in the sidewalks. And under ADA, you have to have a minimum of 42 inches of unobstructed space. And there's just lots of places downtown where it's going to be extremely difficult to accomplish that. And we, as part of this whole study session process, made the business community aware of that fact. We also have the issue of, we have a variety of traffic control devices. No parking signs, street lights, caution signs, all of those cannot be obstructed by signs either. So it does create some challenges, but the permitting process is a very, very informal process that allows us to go out and work with the business, make sure that they know exactly where the signs can be. And so we included that definition. Now, one of the areas that we addressed is the issue of flags, and this was a comment I also received from Commissioner Reynolds. We created an exemption for certain types of flags in the sign code. And because people fly a variety of flags, whether it be the United States flag, some people will fly flags of foreign nations. I happen to have a flag right on my cup. We wanted to make sure that those were accepted. Now, the question that Commissioner Reynolds raised was a question of, what about flags that are representations of a political subdivision flag? And I actually noticed one of these. I walked through my neighborhood, and there are a couple of houses that have U.S. flags that are all blue, and they're to recognize police and law enforcement officers. I think it certainly would be the intent here, and my recommendation would be that we will make a modification to that to make sure that representation of a political subdivision flag is also not a sign. I have one house in my neighborhood had a U.S. flag in the rainbow colors, the stripes. Again, that's a representation of the flag. The intent would be to accept those types of flags from being a sign. What the concern is that sometimes vendors will use large flags as a way of identifying their business. You will see some car dealerships that will have flags as big as that wall, and they will use it on a very tall pole to identify their business. That's really what we're focused on, is flags that are really being used as a sign. And those we don't want to accept from the sign code. One of the other issues is that we have noticed in a trend that occasionally businesses, our current sign code basically permits you to have a sign inside your business that's designed to be seen from the street and act as a sign. And it's not regulated at all. Now, the difficulty with that is if it's designed to act like a sign and be a sign, we've created sort of an odd distinction. As long as it's inside my business, it may be flashing lights, it may look like a sign in every respect, but because it's behind a glass, it's not a sign. We've addressed that by making it clear that signs that are visible from the street and designed to advertise the business, as compared to advertising individual merchandise, would be covered by the sign code. And as I mentioned, we did address portable sandwich board signs. Throughout the draft, you'll see that we've replaced building official with community development director because, again, as I mentioned, this is a zoning code. One of the items that we have also addressed is, right now, our portable signs must all be constructed of wood or metal. The reality of it is lots of portable signs are now constructed of hard plastic, some are constructed of fiberglass or other substances. They're not necessarily constructed of wood or metal. So we've just changed that to being an approved material because it just recognizes. In 1971, yes, I suspect you would found that all portable signs were either wood or metal. But in 2018, that's not the case. So we have addressed that. One of the other issues that we did not have a provision for in our code was fast food establishment menu ordering signs. Quite honestly, right now, if a fast food establishment wanted to do a menu ordering sign as long as this wall, it would be perfectly permitted. Now, the reality of it is if you go to a fast food establishment, I've never seen one that big, but it could, right, if a person wanted to do that, they would be able to. What we did is incorporate a restriction that the sign be no larger than 25 square feet. That's essentially a 5x5 sign. We found that most of those fit that. If we felt that there was a problem, we could certainly adjust that up. But the idea would be that we want those signs to be not a distraction, but an ability that works to assist the customer. The other significant change that we made to the code, other than temporary signs, is that we also addressed the fact that certain types of signs may actually require a building permit if you do a significant standalone sign, such as like along a freeway that might be 40 or 50 feet high on top of a pedestal. Those generally would have a separate building permit because the pedestal would be one structure and the sign would be another. And so we did address that and kept that in there. Finally, the biggest area was to actually deal with the abatement of signs. The current provisions in the code really, I would describe them as very, very difficult to address sign violations. They are difficult in terms of they provide little guidance for how they're to be applied, and they don't really seem to get you to end result, either that the sign is in compliance or not. So we have modified those provisions. We looked at a number of city codes throughout the Front Range area, including Aurora. We looked at Greeley. We looked at the Milton Code itself. And what we did was we looked at those codes, and what we found in those codes was that the abatement process is much more straightforward. That you're notified of a violation, you can either appeal the violation, or if you don't appeal the violation, you can abate the sign, and ultimately, if you do not abate the sign, the city would have the right to remove it, and the city would have the right to place a lien upon your property. And so we have restructured the abatement provisions to follow this common process. Now, one of the issues that was raised is that there's a U.S. Supreme Court case that provides for what we call prompt judicial review. The idea here is that you can't basically sit there and never decide a case. And the case comes up really in this context, and it comes up in the adult use context. It's a case called FWPBS versus City of Dallas. And what we've done here is that there is a 28-day deadline to file your case with the Board of Adjustment. The one thing that I am going to recommend would be that we actually put a provision in here giving the Board of Adjustment a certain time frame by which they have to decide the case. That, I think, will make sure that we would have satisfied any challenges under FWPBS. So that is a change that we would make. At the end of this, essentially what will happen is that if the council does adopt this will become the sign code for the city and then go into effect. From that point forward, the sign code would also be under the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission in terms of review and action on any amendments. It certainly is my recommendation that we proceed in this regard. The sign code is actually a very important part of development and will continue to be an important part of development in this community, particularly with things like plan development. As either myself or Carol can tell you, most plan developments usually want to integrate the sign package as part of their development. And right now we have a very disjointed structure that doesn't really work very well. And what the goal here is to improve the structure and also make it, frankly, it's a structure that's not particularly easy for the applicant to negotiate. If you look at our current sign code, what we do to process cases and what our code says, it's a very difficult thing for the applicant to negotiate. One of the goals here is we're hoping that we have made our code more straightforward and will be easier for applicants to negotiate. Because one of the big issues is when people think of zoning codes, they always think of big, large developers. A lot of the folks who are seeking sign permits are really mom and pops. They're people who operate a business that is usually a single establishment and they want a sign. And frankly, for them, negotiating a complex sign code can be a very difficult thing. And so one of the issues we've tried to do is to make the sign code in terms of how we process items more workable. And I don't know, Carol, if you have anything you want to add to what I just said before we open it for questions?
Nope.
And with that, Mr. Chair, I would be happy to answer any questions that the Commission has, assuming this, I believe, is scheduled for first read late in April, and then would go to second read. And why that is...
Planning Commissioner, Council.
Well, at Council. And part of that is that we have a number of first read items that we're trying to not have. It gets very long if you have 10 second reads and 10 public hearings. So we're trying to manage the numbers of items so that we get them all through on the agenda. But it's an awful lot to ask for citizens who come and want to participate in the meeting if there's 10 public hearings. And so with that, I'm pleased to answer any questions that you have.
A couple of clarifications before we start getting individual questions. The Planning Commission, this is the study session. You're not looking for approval from us. Does it require a formal approval from us in chambers?
No, because it's part of the building code. If this was a regular amendment, we'd be going through that process because it'd be part of the land use code. Here, because it's part of the building code, until it's put into the code, it's not technically within your jurisdiction. However, we felt it was important to review this with you because we're proposing to put it in the land use code.
So no formal...
So there's no formal approval required.
Okay. Let's see, what was the other one? Once this slides over to the zoning code and a case comes up, whatever, that case will not come to the planning commission. It'll go, number one, to the community development director. If they appeal that, it goes to the Board of Adjustment.
Yes.
So normally, well, maybe always, planning commission will not be involved with sign cases, is that correct?
You would not be involved with sign cases except if you have like a planned development district that had a customized sign package, then that sign package would be part of the district and coming to you.
But the normal mom and pop or whatever.
The normal mom and pop.
Chevron wants to do something
Yeah.
different with their sign, okay.
I would expect that those will all be going through the staff, and then if there's an appeal to the Board of Adjustment.
Okay. That was just general questions as to how this works. Individual questions? Anybody can start. I always look at you first, so I'm looking over here for any questions.
Sure. In the downtown area, has there been a map drawn of the various parcels that are, and maybe it's not limited to downtown, it's probably everywhere, of areas that you can have a sign and can't have a sign because of the ADA compliance issues and sort of the weave you have to do through downtown? Are those parcels available and designated?
We haven't designated those parcels. Those we are proposing to do through a permit process because each parcel is very individual and it's really hard. We know certain areas that we could show on a map, but then it'd be very difficult because some businesses would have more space than others. So what we've incorporated in here was a very simplified permit process where part of that permit process will be to look at that particular establishment and then determine where they can have a sign. And they would actually get a map from us that would show, okay, for your establishment, you would be able to locate a sign in these areas.
Who owns the dirt outside of the restaurant?
And that would depend. If you look in downtown, our right-of-way comes very close, if not right up to the door.
Yeah, there's a number of them where the right-of-way is right to the front door, so as soon as you walk out of the building, you're in the city's right-of-way.
So does the city own the dirt where the sign would go?
Yes.
And is the permit, in essence, paying for the ability to use that dirt to mount your sign?
Well, that's where the city owns the dirt. The reason for the permit is to make sure that the city's use of that dirt is not interfered with. We're willing to allow a property owner to have a sign there, and we actually allow private property owners to do other things in our rights of way. But our goal is we have to first make sure that ADA is complied with, all of our duties to the public are complied with in terms of maintaining the right-of-way in a reasonably safe condition, and that it not interfere with things such as vehicular traffic, bicycles, and those things. So if we can meet those requirements, then the city would be prepared to allow the use of that right-of-way. But one of the things we did also limit is only one sign is going to be permitted per property. So if you have a two-story with maybe an office on the second story and a retail business on the first story, there's one sign. It can advertise both, but you can't have two signs.
What if I was somebody who didn't have one of those restaurants or building or businesses right there on Main Street, but I wanted to put a sign there?
We're not allowing off-premise signage. Now, the city does have wayfaring signs, which we allow for as directional signs to businesses. Those are not going away. But we would not allow, under this amendment, sandwich board signs for off-premise businesses.
So it would have to be within a 20-foot or 50-foot radius?
It would have to be basically in front of that business on that piece of right-of-way in front of that business. And one of the concerns that the council had was they were very much concerned about a cluttering of sandwich board signs. And they recognized the needs of the business community, but also wanted to avoid the cluttering effect that if this was unregulated, that they were concerned could occur.
If the city owns the dirt, is our permit fee basically just paying for the license to be able to have a sign? Or is it in essence renting the dirt like a lease for the ability to show or display the sign there?
I think the intent would be that the permit fee, like most of our other permit fees, is really gonna basically pay for the city's review cost in reviewing this. So what, in fact, we are in the middle of a cost of service study, where we're looking at all of our fees based on the idea being, what does it cost us to do the review required by that particular application, and that should decide the fee.
But it's not a rental
It's
space
not a rental.
to have your sign.
And to your question about the map, we don't even have site development plans on file for a lot of these older businesses and throughout the whole city. There's some developments up and down Littleton Boulevard that we don't have a site development. So to get that, find out where the sidewalk is and where the sidewalk ends and where the building begins, to have that, we don't even have that on file. So it would be more just looking at Google Earth and GIS and determining that we don't have something on file.
Would there be, this may be my last question, a physical review of the different sign types? I noticed there's a good deal of demonstration. A visual would be very helpful. It's a sign.
Part of the requirement that we'll get with the sign permit, like what we're getting now, we get a picture of the sign, dimensions, everything is dimensioned down to, if it's a circle sign and it's got, you have to measure the size of the curve, and so you get the area and square footage of this, and so we will actually know that, the materials, if it's lighted, if it's not, if it has to have electrical to it, then that could have a building component to it as well.
Is it appropriate to put a visual in a code document or a visual representation or diagram?
Well, the problem is if it changes or you have something, you have to accommodate for every single possibility too. Once you start doing one, then why didn't you cover this one? It starts, like you only covered ones with circles, and why didn't you cover one with triangles and one that cover, then it starts getting.
Well, then, I hear you and I agree with you, and I'm not arguing the point.
Right.
You could an argument debate of this covers 98% of it. Rhombuses and circles and squares and trapezoids and hexagons. Okay, good, that's 98%. There's got to be some sort of industry standard to identify. I'm just a very simple brain, and I'd like to see it laid out in a way that somebody gets this.
And I think that would be, right now, our code doesn't really have diagrams. I think the long-term intent would be, whether it be in the code or whether it be in many cities, they will have a manual of development standards that is basically attached to their code, and it has all of those diagrams in it. I would tell you that's where we want to get to, is you, ideally in an ideal world, whether it's a street cross-section or a sign or a
building height diagram or all those things.
All of those should be looked for.
That should be in like an addendum of guide to using this code, type of a book of how to find, what does this mean in plain, simple English?
We are working towards that. I would tell you, right now we're trying to deal with making pieces of the code more workable and more clear, but both Jocelyn, myself, city manager, we're all acutely aware that that is a piece that we need to address as well.
I appreciate your conservative approach to that. I'm a just do it and get it done kind of guy. So I'd encourage you to make it as simple as possible, as quick as possible.
And we're going to keep on pushing on that. As I tell people, we have about a 40-card track of changes to the code, and we're working through all of the cards. But we are acutely aware that's something that we need.
John?
There are certain properties that are large enough to where a pop-up tent that can have a form of a sign on the awning of the tent. Is that something that should be addressed in this?
So what do you mean? Like a temporary
Yeah.
tent for like outdoor dining, or what? I'm trying to understand.
Whatever, shelter from rain, kind of things that get put
Like
up.
umbrellas or something that can be put up? Or?
More like the 4-pole tents, the kind that get put up for the block parties. But there are certain businesses that have enough room in front of their business to set those up. and some of those can have a graphic for the business.
So would that be covered under a temporary sign, Steve? Because it wouldn't be permanent.
So, yeah, they would be a form of a temporary,
Temporary sign, not a permanent one, but a temporary.
although they wouldn't be permanent unless it's the red tents in front of
That is
Those red tents are.
something that I think we ought to take a look at. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen a lot of businesses, beer companies would do the four-post awnings, and then the awning were advertised.
Yeah.
Any number, whether it's Anheuser-Busch or Sam Adams or Heineken, I've seen them all. And in some ways, I mean, it seems to me that ought to be treated as a commercial temporary sign. And right now, we have wall signs, we have some other temporary signs, but I don't think it's necessarily clear that those would be a temporary sign.
You might want to add that.
And so I think that is something that we definitely will go back and take a look at, because I can see where those could, they function like a sign, so.
Right, yeah. Okay, good. Then on the wayfinding signs, I saw towards the end of the document, it's like the last page, is discuss the wayfinding signs.
Yes.
What page is that?
It would be page 30.
City place signs,
Yes.
is that what it is?
The
Yeah,
basic
city place
sign.
signs. But the wayfinding is not in the definitions. So just wondered if that would be put in the W category in the types of signs. And then,
And let me answer that. Generally, the reason that we would not include that in the definition is, those are really what we call a governmental speech sign.
Okay.
And so they are basically limited by the government to certain very limited categories of speech. For example, and this is consistent with the U.S. Supreme Court decision, that government speech, in terms of that kind of signs, can be limited, and we certainly want to do that. For example, if we didn't do that, I might be Citizens for Gun Control, or the NRA, and I might want to be posted on a city wayfinding sign as some kind of advertisement. And the concept of those signs is that they meet that very limited criteria in the code and nothing else.
You want us to see if we could, you're suggesting we have a definition
I
for
would think,
wayfinding?
no,
You
I
don't think
would rather
we're-
not have I'd recommend not having a definition,
Okay.
because then we're almost beginning to create it as a category of signs, and it's not, it's a limited government speech sign.
Is that the only place though, Steve, that wayfinding is used? Or do
Yes.
developers use wayfinding
No,
for their
it's only used.
directional signage?
It's only used under city place signs.
Okay, just want to check. We've got directional sign,
Yeah, directional signage, but not wayfinding.
okay,
Wayfinding is only used in that one
okay.
section.
then, is there any reason to include information on the process to qualify for having your business name appear on a wayfinding sign?
I would recommend that shouldn't be done in the code. That really ought to be more of an administrative process. I believe that's handled right now through the city's economic development department. But we certainly can provide information to prospective customers who meet the criteria of this code to be included. And I'll work with community development and economic development in making sure that that information is out there on if you're a business, how do you get included on the sign?
So there's no reason to mention that contact community development for wayfinding signs in the code itself?
That should not be in the code. That's really an administrative function.
Okay. And then this may be similar in that on, let's see, I made a note here. the temporary signs,
Yes.
permits, inspections, and maintenance, there is some instructions on that, the first paragraph, that a separate sign permit for such signs pursuant to the sign code of the city. But it doesn't say where these permits are obtained from and submitted to.
And that, again, is an administrative function, but if this is put in to the zoning code, all of those permits, right, would be done through community development, because it's the designated department in Title I of the city code to execute these powers. Right now, this does create this very problem exists, because if I was to read this code, I would think I go to the building department because it says building code of the city. And in reality, the building department does not handle signs at all right now. So,
They get sent over to community
just-
development. When they come in, Pam Hall processes the majority of them with several other people being backups. Pam Hall would get them and then they would be reviewed under community development. We will add something to our website. We have other requests on the website under community development, building services, and we have how to request a permit for this, and we have like how-to guides and stuff on the website.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, most people will go to the website before they go.
Right. So we'll direct people to that and get into the application, and it'll probably, be a sign permit will be a part of our common app. We have one application type for all of our case types, so we'll probably have to add a sign code to that once it's moved over. If it gets approved to be moved over, we'll put it on our application too, so it'll come in through community development.
Yep. That's all for me.
Sure. So, thank you for answering the questions I had emailed earlier.
No problem.
Appreciated that. Did have a follow-up on the flags and content neutrality.
Yes.
And yeah, just wanting to make sure that the political subdivision sort of, and state flags, you're comfortable with that passing the Reed versus Gilbert.
Yes, I mean, it's political subdivisions. If you wish to put a CSU flag in your front yard, go Rams. That is a political subdivision of the state of Colorado. I might make an exception for you.
The Denver Broncos.
Michigan State grad, I don't know, as a Spartan, I'm not sure Amazing Blue really works on design criteria, but no, those would all be political subdivisions.
Well, and the follow-up question was, of course, about, let's say that, something miraculous happened and, the Creighton Blue Jays were in the Final Four. That is a private Catholic university and not a political subdivision. Likewise, the Denver Broncos, I don't believe, are a political subdivision.
And I thought about that long and hard, and the concern I have is we then begin to get into a whole series of other issues. For example, some private religious universities have religious-oriented seals. And so we're now suddenly beginning to treat religious speech the same as we would treat political subdivisions. My recommendation would be, yes, the public universities are political subdivisions of the state, and their flags would be treated just like a city flag. No different than the Littleton flag, but the private universities, I do think, pose an issue.
So Steve, some people are religious about the Broncos though, so like what would you do with that?
Well, the Broncos are not a public institution, and I'm afraid if you want it, but realistically, most people hang Broncos flags inside their houses or whatever, and those we don't view as signs. My son was in Afghanistan, and I had a service flag hanging inside the window, and I wondered if the code enforcement people would come by, and they never did. They said, well, we are not going to worry about signs inside your window, and that would be the same thing here. If you want to have a Broncos flag inside your house, I think that is not a sign in terms of our code, unless you're advertising some product on it. if you start advertising, bars or something like that, now we.
Budweiser and Broncos.
Budweiser, Broncos, yeah, that could be an issue.
So Steve, you're saying that's, just for clarification, so somebody could not put a Broncos flag in their front yard?
In the front yard, technically, right now, that's not accepted as a flag.
Okay.
So, I think that's something maybe we as a staff may want to talk about before this goes to council. I mean, frankly, I don't think, as the lawyer, I'm not sure the public interest is terribly impacted in one respect, whether you have a Broncos flag in your front yard or not.
Well, in the interest of who gives it a.
Yeah.
But it could be something of a temporary flag for 2 weeks.
Yes.
Where something is permitted. When the Cubs won the World Series, I'm a Chicagoan.
Yes.
I flew a Cubs flag in my front yard for 2 weeks. And then after that, people said, "What's that?" And then I took it down.
I would have kept it up for 99 years myself.
I was a little pent up, so I had to show you are. And for the record, the Broncos are a product. They are a sporting league that is intending to sell a marketing product to us. And that happen to give us entertainment every Sunday and occasional planning meetings when they're good. So.
We should address this.
So that should be, I would equate that in the very same thing as Budweiser in terms of putting it out there.
Some sign codes address that by allowing flags of a certain square footage regardless of content in a
Right.
residential setting. So that covers the seasonal flags that people might just put out as decorations by the
Santa
front door.
Claus.
Yeah, or the duckies and bunnies and painted eggs for springtime. So.
I think we should, as a soccer fan, I mean, if the Rapids ever made it to the MLS Cup, I think I probably would have to have a Rapids flag in my front yard. So I think we ought to address, that is what I view as a very legitimate temporary sign, and is actually in line with some of the other temporary signs that we permit in our code. So I think it's currently not in our code, but we ought to address it so we don't have this issue for the future.
Moving on to portable A-frame signs, just my read, and I think I mentioned this in the email, of the definition. One of the criteria for allowing them in the right-of-way is that they cannot be off-premises, but the definition of off-premises means that the right-of-way is basically off-premises. So,
And that's, here, for the portable A-frame, we specifically, in that set of requirements, allow for the right-of-way. So that specific language would govern over the general, but this topic had a lot of discussion, I can tell you, at the council level.
A while.
Because we certainly want to help promote Littleton businesses. And the city is acutely aware of the importance of the commercial sector to our community and making this a vibrant community that people want to be a part of. At the same time, the city is very, very concerned that we not have a cluttering of these signs. So I think, quite candidly, this is, if the council approves this will be in the code. I've already had the instruction that in about a year, come back and let us know how this is going.
right, want to avoid the unrestricted proliferation of the A-frames. The final question I had was about on page 29, that's 10-17-8-3, personally held signs
Yes.
are allowed, but then in the prohibited signs, which is many pages earlier, 10-17-6-2, it prohibits commercial mascot signs. And yeah, I'm wondering if those two kind of work together.
They do, I mean, the concern the city's had over commercial mascot signs is some people, I lived in Arizona for a number of years, and the mascot for the Phoenix Suns was the gorilla. And people would have gorillas out advertising their business. And they were a distraction And so that concern would be that we not have I don't think we'll have a gorilla up here, but maybe
Chick-fil-A cow for
the
the
Chick-fil-A cow or a walking coyote or who knows. But the idea would be that those would be prohibited in the code. On the other hand, for example, there's a well-known income tax service who has the Statue of Liberty standing right outside their stores right now, advertising their income tax services. And that Statue of Liberty is not a mascot as compared to the gorilla. And so we do treat that as a sign walker, but we would not permit the gorilla or the coyote or any of the other mascots.
Thank you.
Bruce?
A few years ago, there was an ordinance allowing the downtown businesses to do wagons with product, store offering inventory or planters and so forth and so on. You recall?
Yeah, so the outdoor display areas.
Yeah, exactly. And they had to, I think they had to submit some sort of a drawing similar to what maybe you guys are thinking here. And so I just wondered, is there any needed consideration for if you already have hypothetically something like a wagon with stuff with, your product in it? Does that essentially constitute a sign, or could you then go A-frame on top of?
In addition to that, so you'd have the outdoor display area
Yeah,
plus
exactly.
the A-frame, and then you've got a lot of stuff in that area.
Yeah,
Realistically, I think the problem that you're going to have in that situation is your outdoor display area, particularly in the downtown, is likely to be in our right-of-way.
and it's
there
very
isn't-
close.
There isn't sufficient right-of-way going to be there between that, having an ADA accessible corridor, and if you look at our right-of-way, we have an awful lot of things along the curb. And it's going to basically make it extremely difficult for a business to meet those criteria.
Okay. Well, and mainly, yeah, I think that particular issue, as long as you guys are, you recall and you're aware of it, and as long as these two things are fairly integrated so they complement one another however you want to do it, I don't have any issues. It's just, Steve, what you said, I mean, there is on occasion an awful lot of stuff in front of some of the stores just in terms of things to navigate. Let me see here, I had a couple others. And I think you may have answered this with one of the other questions, but if we had like a zoning notice sign, every once in a while you'll see where we have to post a sign that there's something's coming before planning commission on a land use. I assume that's the government speech
That's a
kind of
government
thing.
sign,
Yeah.
and that's an official notice required by law. We can place it in the public right-of-way, we can place it on city property, and that is not a sign.
That's fine, okay. We took political signs out. Within political signs, there was a clause saying they needed to be removed within 10 days after an election. In the temporary signs, you basically identify political signs, but there's no time limit that I noticed with respect to removal of a temporary sign. Did I just not see it, or is?
I think if you look at page 17, number L2, it provides that temporary signs associated with a non-commercial event, such as a community fair or election or any other type of political sign, shall be removed within 10 calendar days after the event for purposes of election-related signs.
Okay.
The event is defined as the primary or general election day.
That's fine. Yeah, no, I missed that piece of it, so as long as it's in there, that's great. And I think on the flag issues, the only other one that came to mind, and maybe it's constituted as a quote-unquote political subdivision, but US territory kind of thing. So if somebody wanted to put up a Puerto Rican flag or something, that would be okay, I
Yes,
assume?
that is the intent here on flags.
State or
that,
political, okay, just political subdivision of the United States.
Political subdivision of the United States, and they are all defined as political, whether Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth or the Commonwealth of the Micronesia, all of those are defined as political subdivisions of the United States.
On murals, a question, the murals shall be allowed in accordance with the provisions of the code by special permit. Do we need, if we're regulating murals in terms of somebody putting up a mural, do we need to, and I'm asking because I don't know, do we need to bring the content of the mural to somebody like the Fine Arts Board to render a decision on community appropriateness?
Well, this is, we're really looking here in cases of murals that are really being used as a sign. Now, if we were going to have a mural done as a piece of art, for example, in the last community I was in, they did a mural on a large commercial structure honoring the pioneers who founded the community. That, to me, would not be a sign. That would be a piece of art, and the Fine Arts Board would be very involved with this.
Well, does that distinction need to be made? I mean, because we've got there is an example of it over on Prince Street, where there's a large mural that has nothing to do with, it's not a sign, it's art. But we didn't, since this didn't exist as any sort of regulation, I mean, I don't have any problem necessarily one way or the other with either the content of that one or the concept. But if we're gonna do it, if we're gonna stipulate that a mural that talks about commercial application is a sign, then do we need to?
Murals as art versus murals as sign.
Yeah, exactly.
We define that in the definition. We define mural as a piece of artwork painted or applied directly on an exterior wall, scene, or other permanent exterior surface.
But could that also be a mural as art versus mural versus sign?
But then we go into the last piece of this, images that are communicative in nature with the intent of communicating information about a product, service, or event are a sign for purposes of this code.
Which that part I don't have any objection to. I mean, I agree with it.
Should
But-
we specify, Steve? I think it's your question that
Yeah.
if it's art and it goes through a separate process for art, is that?
Well, that's, I guess, my question. Is there a separate process for someone who wants to put a mural on a building so that somebody basically says you can't, there's certain community standards that, yeah, that's a decent representation, but this isn't?
I'd like to take a look at that. I mean, because the issue is that if you were seeking, for example, city funds for a mural, even to put it on a private building, could have to go through the Fine Arts Board, and we would look at that. But conceivably, you could have a person who says, I don't want any city money. I just want to paint a mural on the side of my building. And it could be rather provocative. And I think we probably, now we are certainly not going to censor items, and we can't do that under the First Amendment. But there are some murals that, a classic example, City of Phoenix paid for a public art project, and the public art project was a picture of President Trump with essentially far-right insignia overlaid over his picture. And the city took tremendous heat for that, having used public funds to pay for the project. They didn't review the project, and we can't review those types of projects for content. But I can certainly appreciate the fact that there may be, this is a very difficult, fine line.
No, I totally understand. Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. But I mean, as the Pandora's box is, if we're going to regulate murals as sign,
I mean, if you want
if they aren't a sign.
if If you want to paint a Budweiser mural on the side of your building, that's pretty easy. That is communicative in nature, and it's designed to communicate information about a product by me.
What if you want to paint a butterfly?
A butterfly, to me, that's art. That's not communicative. You're not advertising anything.
Oh, what if you want to paint a Clydesdale?
Obvious.
I don't know.
Or,
I don't want to go off the
well, I
rails on this.
understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
though. I mean, if somebody wants to maybe,
Yeah.
what's art?
I think if it's gonna come up and you've got the Fine Arts Board, I think you guys may want to noodle a little bit on how you want to approach
I'm going to
this.
definitely give some thought to trying to figure out art in light of the First Amendment.
Yeah, exactly.
Art versus sign.
Yeah, no, exactly. Let me see here. Okay, don't go there. Give me 1 second here, I put the notes in. In 10-17-6-6 on page 14, and I guess this isn't new text, but I didn't, as you say, we don't get this, or we don't deal with this stuff very frequently. It talks about temporary signs may be erected and maintained, and such permit shall be valid for a period of not more than 6 months, and shall not be renewed for more than 4 successive periods. So theoretically, if somebody has a temporary sign up, it could be up for 2 years, which doesn't strike me necessarily as being temporary.
And we can certainly take a look at that. What you do sometimes get into something would be either construction or whatever, where it could go on for a period of time, but it may, 4 successive periods of 6 months is 2 years, and it may be better that we take a look at that and limit that to maybe 2 periods, and then if you thought you needed more, you could appeal to the Board of Adjustment or something, and.
Or you stipulate that if it's not, quote, like a construction project, then it's like, 2 months or some such thing. I mean, it depends what it is.
Yeah. I can see sometimes the city may do events like the Middleton Criterium, which the sign may well be up for 6 months, but I think people would, I think, have a different opinion if that sign was up for a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. I think the last one in particular, probably 2 other questions. On page 20, it's 10-17-7-3 sub D.
Yeah. One of the difficulties with this was trying to fit this within the nomenclature of our current code, which has its own issues, but that's a much bigger issue than this.
It's sub D, sub 4. You got termination of non-conforming signs by amortization. Fascinating use of that word, which usually has an accounting phrase to it, but under E sub 1, you're talking about amortizing something over 7 years, which is essentially what the phrase means, but is somebody seriously tracking when a sign goes up, when a non-conforming sign goes up, and actually amortizing it over 7 years so they can send a notice and say, hey, your clock's run out?
Well, today it couldn't be built because it's not conforming. We're talking about older signs pre this code.
I would tell you, I think the intent would be here, this is one of the issues with the current sign code. Building departments really aren't designed to do that because they don't get into these types of issues. Now, the Community Development Department deals with non-conforming uses.
Okay.
And so this is more, pardon the pun, in the community development mindset than it is in the building code mindset, because they deal with it.
If you're dealing with amortization, you want to talk to the finance department. They can probably help.
But it is something that This is another one of these areas where, at some point, we will likely be coming to you as the planning commission. One of the areas we're looking at is our non-conforming use code. Because it's, again, one of those things that, it also needs some work.
A lot.
Yeah.
As you can see, there's a number of things we're working on, and,
One perhaps helpful grammatical item, 10-17-7-4 sub C,
What page?
21.
Sorry, I'm a page number person, so it's.
That's fine. You've got in here community development director or designee, but up above you defined community development director as the director or any applicable designee. This or designee got run in on a number of these things here further down, and it was just a review oversight, so you might want to go in and search for designee.
Some of them
and
have
get rid
it,
of
some
them.
of them.
and we only need it once, and I agree with you, and we'll take that out.
Yeah, exactly, and it got replicated a lot, so I just wanted to mention that, to be honest. That's all I've got, I think. Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, I've got 6 questions on specific pages and a couple of general questions.
Okay.
Page 7. Signs on residence. For each dwelling unit, a total sign display area of 10 feet. I assume it means 10 square feet. Was the square left off? 10 linear feet, vertically, horizontally?
It's it's right here. Signs, 10 square feet. Should be 10.
I think it should be 10 square feet. Right now, I think that the language that isn't in caps is a carryover of the old code. So yes, I think
We can fix that though.
we will fix that.
Sounds reasonable versus, 10 linear feet with letters that are 12 feet high or whatever, or 10 feet high and 10 feet long.
100 feet high. Anything, yeah. 1 foot wide.
Okay. So 10 square feet. Let's see, page 8. The commercial mascot, does this bar people from standing, outside twirling their signs saying, "Come to eat at our restaurant"?
No, those would be sign walkers. This would basically limit individuals from doing the
Okay, you got mascots and then just people.
A mascot is defined, and one of the issues that comes up a little bit more with sign walkers that we get into is that sign walkers, the courts have generally provided for some degree of First Amendment protection for that. Now, I think
So those would be a sign twirler?
sign twirlers, yes.
Okay.
Although sign twirler is considered part of the definition of commercial mascot, so that definition of
Yeah, we should
commercial
try to look
mascot
at
might need a little
We,
look.
we'll go back and we'll take a look at that.
Let me look at that.
Mind if I just keep going on, or you?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
let us keep up though.
Okay, well, fast and furious.
You gotta write faster.
We don't want to bore anybody to death here. Page 12, I didn't do a spelling check, but there is one spelling error. Number 5, menu ordering signs at restaurants.
Oh, yes. Every so often my spell check just misses a word. Mr. Gates is not perfect on his spell check.
Yeah, I'd say
We'll
so.
correct that.
Somebody should go through this. Page 20. Number 4, C and D. You talk about less than $150, and then the next paragraph D, you say it costs $150 or more.
So where,
Oh,
I'm
I
sorry,
see
Mark.
that. Yes, that was a
C and D,
carryover.
number 4. You don't need, that means you're barring all of them. You only need one sentence or something.
That's a carryover of the old code, and
It's-
we need to correct that.
Yeah.
So that,
Okay, got that?
yes.
All right, page 24. Throughout, you talk about the community development director and then the board of adjustment. Here, number 2 and 3 at the bottom of the page, you talk about city manager, or I'm sorry, community development director or the
Before
the city manager.
Yeah, before the city.
Why in this case do you all of a sudden go to the city manager versus the Board of Adjustment?
See right here. See?
Okay, yes, I see that. And the idea here was that this provision would be that if you were going to appeal the creation of a lien on your property by the city removing the sign,
So you did it on purpose
so
then?
we did it on purpose, just because normally on a lien, and we use the language of the city manager, the hearing officer. Quite honestly, I don't see these going to the city manager. Most city managers I've worked with would much rather have an independent hearing officer hear these, and they would rule on whether there's a lien or not, and whether that lien should be imposed on the property. But generally what the due process requires is that there has to be a hearing by a disinterested fact finder. And so it can't be the community development director, it would have to be either the city manager or a hearing officer. And certainly I would tell you, my recommendation would be that we just use an outside hearing officer for these.
Should we correct that in here or keep city manager?
We'll just leave it like it is.
Okay.
Okay. Last one, for my general questions, page 30. These are for personally held signs in traditional public forum areas.
Yes.
Well, maybe that answers my question. What about people doing this and that in dividing strips, holding up signs in dividing strips between, north and south roads at street lights? Is that covered anywhere?
The signs such as like donate to me because I'm a homeless vet, those are generally have been held by the courts to be constitutionally protected solicitation.
Let's say it's somebody with a Budweiser sign. Let's go back to that. In the strip.
In the median, when you say
In the
dividing
median,
strip,
yes.
okay.
Sorry.
I was still stuck on that, sorry. Okay.
Are they allowed to do that? Or
Now, in terms of
Right away.
a purely commercial use, such as in our median, that becomes different. I mean, the difficulty here is the courts have said we cannot regulate what's known as First Amendment speech, but to me, people in the city's right-of-way under on page 29, what the courts have said is that the right-of-way, like along the side of the street, is a public forum. Medians become a different issue, and so we right now haven't really addressed that within, and that's usually not addressed in the sign code, that's usually addressed more in your general criminal code under a principle what we call aggressive solicitation, where, and that's where we would normally address that. We normally don't address it as a sign, we address it as solicitation. I've not seen it here, but
we won't get into that.
In a number of cities, you have people who will run out from the median and wash your windshields. Which is a really, I think, a very, very dangerous thing. And we certainly want to address that because people can get hurt, and yet we also recognize constitutionally protected conduct as well.
Last two questions. Is there a maximum flag size in the code here?
Not for flags are accepted. Now, other flags that would not be accepted, they would be treated as a sign, and they would be subject to the maximum sizes for signs. But flags that are accepted would not be. And so the issue will be where the flags that this becomes an issue, and again, Carol can speak to this from a planning standpoint, is auto dealers and some gas stations are well known for having them. There's no American flag too big to advertise.
We're more patriotic than
I mean, I have seen some that can hang from the second floor of this building and touch the ground, and
actually puddle on the ground, they'd be
Yes.
so big, yeah.
And so the issue is, we haven't wanted to get into the fact, because again, that is a symbol, a free speech symbol. But if they were to do that with a Nissan flag or a Mercedes-Benz flag, then that would be treated as a sign.
Okay,
But
so
this
you're-
code is okay with a 600 square foot American flag on Broadway in front of the Mazda dealership.
I mean, personally,
Or the big one down at County Line and Broadway, the Ford has a very big one.
Just,
I have never found an auto dealer who can have a flag, an American flag too big.
Okay, well, you're wiggling a little bit, so it could happen. Last question. Does this cover cars or van advertising, or, A-frames on wheels? Thinking of cars and vans, that obviously they're,
Like a wrap around a car
Yeah.
sitting in the parking lot.
or there's a car with something on top of it, they're just out there in front of the
Pulling
business.
something. Or that's pulling a trailer.
Yeah, pulling a trailer, is that covered? It should be.
I don't believe we're currently regulating signs like wraps on automobiles.
Okay, it's not to say
We're not
wrapped
doing
automobiles, let's just talk about just, say, A signs or vans with it's a giant sign on the side, they park it parallel to the street and they're advertising.
Is it a billboard?
I think that's something that I'm going to talk with the staff about looking at. If one has been to a well-known community in Nevada south of us, you will see vehicles pulling signs on a trailer. And I think certainly those are signs we need to make sure we're regulating them.
Okay, so we'll make a note of that one.
Okay, thanks, that's all I have.
So if you are an establishment and you have a sidewalk in front of you and you do some chalk art in front of your establishment advertising, how does that fit in?
In terms of pop art,
Yeah. But it would be advertising, is what you're saying.
And not just a picture, but you're advertising for your business.
Your
in
business
your chalk art.
logo or something on there.
Yeah, or come on inside to blah, 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 we've got, I don't know, whatever it is.
well, if you were to, you couldn't, we wouldn't let you paint that, like, or put that on the sidewalk. Now, if you wanted to have a sign with your logo on the front of your business, even though technically it's out in our right of way, then we would just treat that as a sign.
What about chalk art that goes away when it rains?
Chalk art?
Yeah.
We're not, no, on our right of way, we would not let you do that. We will let you do, the A-frame is a very limited exception. Right now, the code does not allow for you to put anything else in our right of way. And frankly, from a liability standpoint, as a city attorney, I would be, the more things we put in our right of way, the more it creates issues for us, because we have a duty to make it reasonably safe for all of the users.
The chalk art wouldn't make it unsafe, because it's chalk.
can be.
It's chalk, other than it does create in our right of way another distraction, and that's the
Definitely a distraction.
That's the concern, it is a distraction, and I'm certainly happy to work with the department, we can take a look at this, because from the lawyer standpoint, I have one view on signs, but I'll be quite honest, sometimes planners have a different position on that, and so we'll take a look at that.
This is growing. On page 18, where it talked about signs for areas developed as planned developments or planned development overlays. So that's completely removed. And I didn't see it put anywhere else, so I was just curious about that.
So with plan unit developments, they often want something beyond what the sign code is. Otherwise, they'll just reference signs shall be done in accordance with the sign code. So they would be asking for deviation from that through the plan unit development, through their PD zoning.
So this is basically redundant.
So they would just do it, and you guys would look at it, or if it came forward, the planning commission would look at it as part of that package for the plan development.
And that makes sense in the planned development district, where we're basically developing customized zoning standards for the district. It doesn't make sense in a planned development overlay, where the city standards are meant to be the minimum, and it's not intended in a PDO that you be able to write your own sign code.
And the last one I have, it's on page 24. It's under G, notice to repair or remove, integration of me. And I'm not sure if it's typo or it's just a word I don't know. It's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom where it starts with the COSE, the COSE shall.
Oh, that should be the code with a D, not S. Again,
It's hard when it's all caps to catch them all with.
but we will make that change.
Got one too.
It's all caps are tough, for eyeballs and the computer. Good catch.
At least I
It's a
made
new
one.
technical term we just made up.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I didn't see it abbreviated anywhere else in here. And, well, I just had someone ask about on the staff communications, right above background where it says, please note staff will bring additional diagrams to help explain and review the proposed changes at the study session. And they just had a request if there is going to be something like that, just to include it in the packet so they can see it beforehand.
So sometimes it's not finished, so it's not always.
Just passing along what
Okay.
was stated to me. And
But the intent here is, one of our projects is we are working on, and it's a goal that we have, that we'll have at some point, some cities just call it a design manual, some cities call it an illustrative manual, but it literally will be an appendix to the zoning code with illustrations. And many times what you'll see in the zoning code, it will say, and an illustration for this provision can be found in table 5-3 of the illustrative guide, and then you can just, and that's where,
It's just a glance at the staff report.
okay, and we didn't, you're right, I should have brought some diagrams, but I'm not sure you would have liked my artwork, but we will definitely make sure that we do have some diagrams in there.
Anybody else? Thank you.
And it is our intent, and that we would then take this and move this to a first read of the council, and then ultimately a second read, at which point, assuming council approval, the sign code would become a function of the land use code and be something that would become this commission's responsibility. And I can tell you the chief building official is very happy to see the community development side of the house manage the sign code.
Well, is community development happy getting the sign code now?
We had it anyway.
Yeah, they kind of had it
Doing it
anyway.
anyways, yeah.
Oh, they would come to you for advice or something?
No, they would all come through us to be reviewed,
Oh.
even though it was in the building code.
I see.
Doing those in the building code, so they're now going to officially have
Get
it.
rid of the middleman now, okay.
So we
Yes.
were always looking at them anyway, and then they would pull any necessary building permits too. So we reviewed them as staff against the sign code, and then building would look at any electrical or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more announcements. You all got from Jocelyn the upcoming events, which are quite lengthy here. Just wanted to go over just the first 3 or 4. April 5th is the Board and Commission training. It's not, they're not going to come pick you up. Police are not going to pick you up. Don't arrive, but they strongly suggest you come to that. I always go, even though I've been to probably 10 of these things. I always learn something new, so hopefully you'll come. April 9th is interesting in that it's our regular meeting. We do have one conditional use and an ordinance to update the PDO code section, but we also have our first P4.
Preliminary project plan, and that will be at a study session.
P4.
P4. And the case number will be P4NB for non-binding.
So, if you remember, we voted in favor of that. Council approved it. Our recommendation was approval of the council. That's where the staff will give a presentation on a potential project. The applicant is the owner of the project, or their architect or consultants do not speak. We get a chance to pop off and say anything we want as far as what our feelings are. It gives the future applicant a sense of does this fly or not fly? Is it worth proceeding, or this is a pipe dream? So that will be our first one. Be very
The parcel? Do we know what the property is?
I think it's on the old Marathon site, correct?
Yes, it's over in Littleton Village.
Okay.
We go to study session for that?
Yes, that has to be done in a study session for it to
Right.
be non-binding.
We have to have public input and, you know, the full tilt deal, gavel and all.
Yeah, for the first part, then the second part, we don't get, there's no gavel, it's just comments.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, and then the other interesting thing, this is a breakfast meeting with our new consultants for the comprehensive plan, Kendig and Keast. That's on April 11th, 7:30 to 8:30. Get a free breakfast, but it's on I think it's on a Wednesday or whatever that is, April 11th. So if you can all make it, that would be great. It's our first chance to have some input on the vision to the comprehensive plan. So it's very important. And the rest of it, Jocelyn sent us all out information, good grief, 2 or 3 months out. So we're going to be quite busy. That's all I have. Anything else?
I have a couple questions. So I'm not able to attend the April 5th to a prior commitment. Is it going to be videoed by any chance?
And that one is, I'm sorry, I have a hard time keeping track of all. April 5th is which one, Mark? I'm sorry.
Commission's
It's
training.
Or is it, that should be televised, I mean, recorded. It should
Okay,
be.
so I can watch
I think we've done all the other ones recorded, right, Steve, is how we've done those?
Not necessarily, but I'll find out. Let me find out, and we can advise you. Because this isn't like a actual meeting, it's just an instructional training with an outside speaker coming in, so I'll find out.
Yeah, it'd just be nice to hear what they have to say. Like Mark said, you always learn something new when someone speaks.
I will find out and let Jocelyn know.
Thank you. And for the P4, will we be getting in our packet a lot of what you're saying so we can look at beforehand to have a better idea of what we should be thinking about?
So we're not even, it's think about it as just the facts, ma'am. We're just reporting the facts. However the developer gives them to us is how they will be given to Planning Commission.
But will that be in our packet beforehand?
Yes, there'll be the information that they've given us and the application will be made to you.
Appreciate that, thank you.
So it comes out like Thursday or Friday before that Monday.
And how this is just different, it's not like a normal case where the staff would go through a detailed analysis. You're basically getting this raw from the developer and providing your initial thoughts. Then the developer still has to file an application that goes through the routine city application process.
That will be evaluated against codes and requirements, but this one is not. This is just simply, they give it to us, we package it up, we give it to you.
Thank you.
So no editorial comment from you, no
No.
body language one way or the other, just the
We're
facts.
just reporters.
Okay.
You can editorialize all you want.
They
You
can
want to be
permission to you.
editorializing,
I think that's the point. That's the point, is say what you
Yes, that's
said.
the point. Exactly.
All we're doing is just the deliverer of the message from them.
Is the breakfast here?
I think it is here, whether it be this room
Community
or
room?
I think it's here.
Last time, wasn't it over at the library or something?
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
That was, I think, the Joint City Council Planning Commission.
Well, it's got to be here because we have a regular meeting for conditional use.
No, it's at 7 a.m.
That's the breakfast.
7 to 8 a.m.
Yes.
The breakfast meeting,
Okay.
the 11th.
Are you talking about the P4 or are you talking about?
No,
No, the breakfast meeting with the comp plan
Oh,
consultant.
yeah, that's at 7:30.
here at this office
I
building,
think,
did you say?
yes, I think so.
7:30.
That's just hack.
It says community room on the
You looked it up.
calendar.
Oh, did it? Oh, okay.
Is it here? Jason, did you look it up? No?
It says community room, so
Oh, that
this
would
is
be
the only
here.
one in the city.
Yep, correct.
No other bigger room available other than there.
It says 7:30 though, right?
7:30 a.m. Wednesday, April 11th.
We can't eat in there, and that's why I asked to be here. And we're not allowed to eat in there.
What about?
In that room, we can't eat snacks in there.
Okay.
Good to know.
Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you. We are adjourned.